I'd like to thank you all for being here. This is our third Civic Engagement Institute event of the semester. We try to bring you at least 4 or 5, and occasionally we'll have a political figure in Connecticut who will bring to light some of the very important issues facing the state, give us some insight to how Connecticut politics works. It's not every day we get that inside scoop. So Mr. J.R. Romano, who is the chair of the Republican Party for the state of Connecticut, is going to speak to you for, I don't know, 40 minutes maybe, as long as I think he has. But then we will open it up to some questions and comments. And so this is your opportunity to ask some questions. He's an awesome guy for coming here, first of all, but he's also awesome because he graduated from Trinity College, which is my alma mater, so we have this kind of Bob already. And he was kind enough to come here. He ran for state rep. He was 24 years old, which isn't something you hear about every day, right? And I love the fact that young people get involved in politics. Usually it's indirectly, but sometimes it's directly. And he lost, but only by 100 votes in a district, from what I recall, was 3-1 Democrat. Is that right? So that was pretty impressive. And so he shifted from there to being, well, there were a lot of steps in between, but he's now the chair of the Republican Party of Connecticut. So, Mr. Romano.
I feel like we're that YouTube video. Well, first of all, I don't know that I can speak consistently for 40 minutes. It's just kind of not my nature. I'd much rather have engagement and conversation with you guys about questions you may have, and then try to weave in what my experience is in terms of answering those questions. I will tell you, as someone who, when I ran for state rep at 24 years old, I was outnumbered 3-1. Now, for those that are familiar with Connecticut's process, we have public financing now for campaigns. That didn't exist when I ran. So not only was I in a district that the Republicans haven't held in probably 60 years at that point, I had to go out and raise money the old-fashioned way. I actually raised about $35,000 myself as a 24-year-old to take on the Democratic team. It was pretty interesting too, because I remember it was literally me, my mother, my father, my big family, versus every major union in the state of Connecticut. And it actually turned it into a big fight between my mother, who's a teacher, and the teachers union, where the majority of the teachers in that district were actually supporting me, but the unions were financially and physically supporting the Democrats. So there's all these little strange nuances that I've experienced, and when I talk about, and I'm just curious, and one of the things I like to kind of approach and discuss first, just to show of hands or shout at me, perceptions of what is a Republican. When you think of a stereotypical Republican, what do you think?
Conservative.
Okay, that's fair. Oh, there's more than that, guys. I won't be offended, I promise. I'm not a millennial.
Like in general?
See, you're already offended, exactly. Seriously, what do you, when you think of a Republican, what do you think?
Big money.
Big money, what else? Okay, you must be a Republican. Who else?
Previously moderation, currently hypocrisy.
That's politics in general.
Small government.
Correct. I'm talking about I know you guys are talking overall party. I'm talking about the people in the party. When you think Republican, what do you think stereotypically?
Daylights. Daylights.
Okay.
White men.
Fair.
Pro-gun.
Again, I'm talking, so I'll just say it's rich white men, right? Okay. So I will tell you that is not me. I grew up single mom. Father was in and out of recovery his entire life. The reason that I was drawn to the Republican Party, frankly, was not even growing up as a Republican. My family was kind of apolitical. They're fun-loving, just community-minded people. I went to college, and I actually started in political science, but I got frustrated because I felt the professor was telling me what to think, not focused on discussion, but more about this is how you must perceive the world. And so I actually changed my major to Oh, sorry guys. I actually changed my major from, it's flashing.
Splash. Never mind.
Oh, I think it's on. Okay. To history, because you can't argue history, right? It happened. And so the two things that I did was I did a vast history of the two parties, and I felt personally that I was more connected to the philosophy of Abraham Lincoln. And if you were to look at his presidential platform from 1868, it still holds true today for many Republicans. You can't tear down the wage payer to help the wage earner. House divided cannot stand. There's lots of little things from Abraham Lincoln that I just related to that original plank. And then when you looked at some of the Democratic Party's history is not a great one when it talks about the KKK and things like that. So I just always felt, looking at the vast history, that I was more of a Republican. And the other thing, what I thought was most interesting was, I mentioned this earlier, at Trinity we don't have theses, we don't have to write these long dissertations. So we have seminars. And one of the things that I wrote my seminar paper on was centered around, and this is going back to 2000, the Latin immigration. What policies can we develop based on history to empower the Latin population? As an Italian, it is the most similar in terms of it was a culture that was centered around farming. There's a language barrier, and so you look at the history of what happened in the Italian immigration movement and the Italian people, and apply it to what was happening to the Latin immigration. What programs and policies can the government create to better empower economically the people who are coming here from Latin America? And so it was really fascinating using history in that context. And that's kind of really what drove me into politics, which is just wanting to help my community. And that's really why I was so invested at a young age. I decided to run at 24 because in my town, which was not a wealthy town, Little Derby, Connecticut, average annual income of about $40,000 a year, we had Democrat leadership forever, and the place wasn't getting any better. We were a community that consistently didn't meet the minimum expenditure requirement for education, but it was one of these communities that was poor that always voted Democrat. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to run. No one thought I had a shot. So they said, the Republican Party literally said, yeah, kid, go ahead, do it. We got no one else. And then I knocked all these doors. And I started talking about what I believed in terms of how I viewed education, how I viewed immigration, how I viewed patriotism, all these random questions. And it would probably surprise you where I stood on a lot of those issues. But I think at the end of the day, what happened was I surprised other people in the Republican Party how well I did. That inspired them to get more organized and do more of the work that I was doing, which led to a Republican mayor, which has led now to, I think we had a Republican mayor in a Democrat city for 8 years, then the Democrat came back for 4, and the Republican came back. I think we just got a Republican. I think that's a good thing. Whenever you have one party rule for a long period of time, it actually doesn't benefit the city, right? So you need to be able to have dialogue and discussion, because when you have two opposing opinions, usually the best answer is in the middle. And that, I think, is what is somewhat frustrating today, where we aren't having those conversations. In fact, at college campuses, a lot, they're shutting down those types of perspectives before you even get to know the person that you're having the conversation with or where they're coming from. And that is one of the things where you look at, and I'm not trying to take shots at Democrats, but when you look at particularly Democrat cities that have had one party control for 30, 40 years, it's not good. The quality of education is low, taxes are really high, and it's just because there's no one monitoring behavior, right? There's no other check to say a bad policy or a bad decision. And so that's when you don't have that fear, you're gonna end up with a problem. And so this is why we often kind of really encourage areas to be a little challenging. I mean, some of the frustrating points, I'm kind of this in-between person, where I deal with a group of Republicans that are much more traditional and conservative. I'm more of a libertarian Republican, but I often find myself really kind of educating a lot of, and by the way, I think this is for a lot of us when you're dealing with baby boomers who may not have had exposure to different cultures, different ideas, and then we have these really hotshot young Republicans that really want to make a difference. Like a prime example, I got in a huge fight in a local, it was a local race where it was a primary situation, and I was really encouraged. It was inner city. I was really encouraged. We had he's a great kid. He's 18 years old. He just graduated high school. He's a Bangladeshi Muslim refugee. And I wanted him to run for state rep. I wanted him to be our nominee. Because he was young, he was energetic, he was going to knock doors, he was going to do all the things necessary. And this is in West Haven, which is a similar community to mine. So I felt he could be a catalyst to energize and to open conversations. But the old Italian guys were like, it's not his turn. It's not his turn. And so what ended up happening, they nominated the old Italian guy. But I kept working with Roman, and he's still involved, and we're getting him involved with us because we can't lose that. And I strongly encourage any of you who want to run, and I don't care which party, it really doesn't matter to me. Don't take no. I mean, I kicked the doors in a couple times in my career. I was not supported to be party chairman, but I outworked the other two guys. Great guys. But I would strongly encourage, don't necessarily take no. I'm not saying cause inter-party fights, but be smart, be strategic, and make sure that you're building coalitions and building relationships versus fighting. Right? That's often what happens, I think, a lot now culturally, is when sometimes, and by the way, I'm not saying this is unique to millennials, because I deal with this a lot with baby boomers too. If you're focused on bringing people together, your message is going to get a lot more support and resonate a lot more. And I think it's frustrating when you're younger. I mean, there's another example in another town where you have these group of people that have been trying to take over politically the town committee, the local town committee. This is a town that the Republicans don't control, so it's not like they're fighting over a lot. So the older entity keeps saying, it's not your time yet, it's not your time yet. Well, when this group of people signed up to join the RTC, they were about 28, 29. They're now 50. And the older group is now 80. And they're still saying, it's not your time yet, it's not your time yet. So now I'm caught in this middle fight between now that the 50-year-olds are trying to take over for leadership and energy. It sounds crazy, right? But that's part of what is the frustrating part about politics. For a lot of people, it's a hobby, and sometimes they really hold on. So again, you have to be creative, and you have to think outside the box when you're younger and you want to make a difference. So the other thing, and I guess I'm kind of open the floor up for questions. I mean, I don't know if you want to talk anything about Connecticut, what it was like, what's it like to be a party chairman. And again, I'm not shy, I'm not going to be offended. You can ask me anything, and we will certainly have a great conversation.
Well, that question about how you came to be party chair and what on a daily basis is your job.
So what I do on a daily basis is I raise money. That's a big part of it, right? So you have to understand how to raise money as a candidate or as a chairman. And if you're ever in that situation, if you're a part of an organization, you're part of a political party, donors want to hear about. You got to treat it like an investment, right? They want to know where the money goes. No one wants to throw money into a black hole. So if you're ever in that position where you're running or raising money for a cause, if you explain to the donors where the money's going, oh, we're going to pay for staff, or we're going to pay for a commercial, you're much more effective in that regard. That's one part of the job. Another part of the job is messaging, communication, how to articulate through difficult times, through policy discussions, what's the best way to formulate either an attack or a prideful moment, how do you handle those situations? That's one part of it. The other is strategy. We do, I think this point so far this year, we've done about 50 training sessions where we go out and we teach candidates and town committees how to be better within their own communities in those, fundraising or messaging or voter identification. A big part of the job is identifying voters about things that they're passionate about and then motivating them to vote based on their passion. That one's hard to do. And the other part is you work with the Republican National Committee. I've been selected, I'm on the Republican National Committee. I've been selected as one of 5 members to actually travel to Taiwan on a cultural exchange. I'm actually leaving next month, so that's going to be pretty cool. So I interact with the National Party. I interact with the presidential campaign. I think in 2016, I was one of the few parties that had a joint fundraising agreement with the presidential campaign. And then you deal with local candidates, the local caucuses. We have another Trinity alum, is that she's the only female leader in the state of Connecticut that was clearedist. She's the leader in the House for the Republicans, and then Len Fasano is the leader of the Senate. And then you work and coordinate with them in terms of voter candidate recruitment, where they see possible vulnerabilities, where Republicans might be able to gain a seat, or we may lose a seat, where I may have to come in and kind of reorganize things. So it's a lot. And then there's also a lot of infighting. Like any organization, there's people that want things. I can't tell you how many people walk in and they'll demand that I give them money or demand that I do something for them, and I have to kind of facilitate a conversation that they're not going to get what they want, but try to almost help get them in a better position. So, and I use metrics a lot. So if a candidate comes to me and says, I need $5,000, and they do, I say, well, how much have you raised? How many doors have you knocked? How much have you done so that I'll support you? Because what the parties are, and this is true of the Democratic Party as well, we're an apparatus that takes a candidate from the 5-yard line to the goal line. We can't run campaigns. I'm not the campaign manager for every candidate. So what we do is we evaluate and review how campaigns are doing. And I'll give you a prime example. In 2016, another Trinity alum, I was telling you this before, I was really happy when he decided to enter the race. But in the beginning of the year, the district is a tough district for us to win. It's actually where I'm originally from. And no one really thought that this candidate had a shot. It was 2016, so the president was on the top of the ticket. This has been a solid blue area for 22 years. So, but he was working, he was knocking doors, he raised his money, and we started to see this kind of shift in support for him. And what ended up happening was, we at the end decided to pull money from a candidate that wasn't working very hard, which didn't make me any friends, but it was the right thing to do. And we backed this senator, he's still a senator today, Senator George Logan. He's one of the coolest senators. He's the first African American that we've elected as a Republican in the state Senate. He's a Trinity alum. And he will run for statewide. I mean, he's a tremendous asset to the party. He's a Jimi Hendrix cover band. I mean, how cool is that? But it was one of those things where if you had asked me in the beginning of that election cycle if he would win, I'd say, tough. That's me being polite, right? Like that's kind of my way of saying no. But he worked his tail off and he pulled it off. I do find it somewhat ironic, and I've talked to a couple national media outlets, but they won't do the story. This district voted for Trump, which, the whole Trump, they're all racist voters, but so they voted for Trump, and then they voted for an African American. So kind of, and remember, it's not a Republican district. This is a Democrat district. And so they voted for Trump and then an African American Republican, which I think is an interesting dynamic when you talk about. There's much more nuance into why people vote for who they vote for than what maybe the national media wants us to believe. And I think that's kind of what's missing, is we're losing self-identity and kind of this self-awareness when you talk to these politicos that like to just have fights on TV. And that gets a little frustrating from my standpoint.
Why is the Republican Party, I've always been curious, the third largest party in the state, and what steps have you taken to broaden its base?
Third largest?
And to behind the Democrats and the Independents?
No. There's the Independent Party is an actual party. Unaffiliated voters is unaffiliated. So there are a majority of unaffiliated voters, which means there's no affiliation to anything. Thanks to Lowell Weicker. Does anyone know who Lowell Weicker is? You should. He gave us the goddamn income tax. He's a Republican, by the way, which we want to banish him. But he gave us the income tax. He formulated a separate independent. That's often confusing. There is an actual independent party that's an I. It is not the same thing as unaffiliated. Other states, it is the same thing. For Connecticut, it's not. So technically, Democrats outnumber us by about 2 to 1 statewide, and then, so we have about 400,000 registered Republicans.
Mr. Romano, what steps have you taken as chairman to increase the base, to broaden the base for the Republican Party?
In terms of voter registration or just
Correct.
communication? Well, so we have actually increased our numbers quite significantly. I think in 2016, it's the first time in about 50 years that there were more people that registered as Republicans than Democrats. I do think motor voter creates a problem though. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. So people go in to get their license renewed or to get their license, and they force, I shouldn't say force you, because registering to vote's a good thing, but they immediately sign you up to be a registered voter, and so there's all this flooding of newly registered voters that may be choosing a party and may not even know the identity or whatever it is. So, but we've been able to increase our voter rolls significantly, and what's shocking, in 2018, we actually saw an increase of, let's take, I think it was New Haven, for example, there was an increase in voter participation by about 25% in the city of New Haven. We managed to get 2% higher amongst that voted for Bob Stefanowski. So what that means is now New Haven, I think we're outnumbered 18 to 1. So to get with a 25% increase in a city like that and still manage to get a 2% increase above, that's a huge move for us. So, and a lot of it is we're winning over middle class voters. Right now, if you look at a map of the state of Connecticut, you'll see this last election cycle. Wealthier voters who can afford to be offended by Trump are voting for Democrats. So the 1% are actually now voting for Democrats. And then the middle class, where I'm from, Derby, Ansonia, Enfield, they're voting for Republicans in much larger numbers. So there's actually a shift happening. It's happening across the country. So it's kind of an interesting, when people actually take the time to look at it, it's an interesting shift happening culturally and from election science.
I have a related question I was going to ask later, but now's the perfect time. So, the Republican Party in Connecticut has long been known for not being able to penetrate the urban areas, the cities, the big cities especially. So, I guess the question is, how do you appeal to people who feel their interests lie with the Democratic Party more than the Republican?
So I think the saddest commentary around the cities, take Bridgeport for example, it's a city of around 100,000 people and only about 12% vote. So that means it's a really small group of people, and usually it's a group of people who are tied to the machine, right? Their parents work for the city, or there's some type of connection to who's in power. And so there's a benefit to keep, and whether it's Republican or Democrat, this happens, but to keep that group in power, to keep what they personally benefit from. And it's very hard to break, because here I'm saying, hey, vote for us, and it's potential, oh, are you going to keep my sister as the town clerk or whatever it may be. So in those big cities, it is really frustrating. Where I think Republicans fail is communicating how our policies are benefited and are designed to create prosperity. And one of those key things is education. Now, what I get really frustrated at is the way the media covers things is, how many people here have heard the story of Tanya McDowell, I'm sorry. You don't know that story? Yeah, right. So Tanya McDowell was a young African-American woman who lived in Bridgeport, actually was living out of a car in Bridgeport, and she got caught sending her child to Norwalk Public School. She was arrested and charged with stealing an education and got 8 years in prison. Don't you think it's a little odd? You didn't see any Democrat politicians rallying for her, even pardoning her. The reason being is Democrats aren't in favor of school choice. If Connecticut was a school choice state and you as a parent could choose where you send your child to school, she wouldn't be in jail. Now, do you think for one moment that they've changed legislation in the state of Connecticut to make sure that will never happen again? They have not. So what I get frustrated here, you have a young single African-American mother, no one cared. No Chris Murphy, no Dick Blumenthal, no one did anything for her. And yet you have these rallies on a policy that they support, And here they are in front of a church talking about immigration or talking about some, when it talks about gun rights. Now, all these things have victims and are tragic. But what ends up happening with a lot of politicians, if the victim doesn't fit their narrative, they don't care. That woman literally got sentenced for stealing an education. How sad is that? And you think, okay, you know what? As a governor, I'll pardon her. But they didn't want to bring attention to this case. And someone said to me, well, it was a Republican mayor in Norwalk, which is true. The city of Norwalk was at that point controlled by Republicans. Right, because technically, it cost the city $30,000 to educate her child. She wasn't a taxpayer. The laws exist the way that they do. If we were a school choice state, though, she'd be home with her son. So now the state takes her son, she goes to prison. No one cared. And you guys need to know that story. That should be one of the biggest stories everybody knows. I wrote op-eds, I tried to organize, no one cared. Nobody cared. And the reason no one cared, you know what they said to me? Well, she's got other charges. She got drug and prostitution charges. So what? She's trying to get a better education for her son so that he can be better, that he can provide, be better. She's trying to lift them up out of this. They didn't care.
Comment. Do you believe that this is more of a Democratic problem and a Republican problem, or do you think this is more of a criminal justice and the media not being able to connect? Because we still, like in my community, I live in New Britain, I know hundreds of stories similar to that one where someone got screwed over by the criminal justice system. There's not always a story for that, and a very big example is Khalif Browder, who ended up taking his own life because no one knew his story, who was in jail for so long. So you do think this is a criminal justice system that's the problem, or do you think it's with the Democrats or Republicans?
So it's a policy problem in both cases. So if we were a school choice state, she wouldn't have been arrested, right? But I also believe we need criminal justice reform. The Republican governor of Georgia, Georgia has been lauded, they've been praised for their criminal justice reform. So what we as a state and a nation have to realize and recognize is that we have to separate the people that we're mad at and the people we're afraid of. We don't treat them differently. So I've always said this. You have you have a 14-year-old in New Britain or New Haven who gets caught selling weed on a street corner. To me, that's the smartest kid in the neighborhood. Because he recognizes his school system's going to fail him. He's trying to help put money in his family's pockets, maybe keep the lights on, maybe keep the rent paid, and he's already an entrepreneur. You should take that kid, give him a skill set that is not criminal. But we don't recognize that, right? There's a stigma there. And so these are things that in Georgia that they are doing. They're literally separating out, I guess, nonviolent offenders, retraining them with a trade. So I would take this kid or this girl who's selling drugs in New Britain. You want to be an electrician, you want to be a hairstylist. I will not only teach you and train you, I will also educate you financially on how credit works, how you can run your own business. Because it needs to go, because what Republicans believe in is prosperity. I will say this, I hate welfare. I don't hate the people on it, I hate that we have to have it. And how do we reduce the number of people that need government assistance, which is a good thing? We have to create opportunity for them. We have to give them a skill set that is better than a minimum wage job. Raising the minimum wage is not going to help anybody. It won't. It actually will hurt more people than help them. And so when we talk about these things, like I agree with you, we have a problem with criminal justice reform. We have a problem with education. When you look at how we spend our money, and it's really frustrating to me. When I first got elected chairman, there was a woman that saw me at a news show, and she goes, you make a lot of really good points, but what you need to recognize is communities like New Haven and New Britain are underserved communities. Bullshit. We've devised programs that don't help. Billions of dollars have been pumped into the inner cities to help. And I have no problem with the money, but the money's not being utilized to actually create any results. So, this is where there's a discussion that we should be having about the use of our money. Like, let me ask you a question. I'm against raising minimum wage. It's not because of small business owners. It's because I accept it's terrible that we have adults working minimum wage jobs. You know what I think we should do? And there isn't a Republican alive that would disagree with me. It's very simple for the state of Connecticut to find people who are adults that are working minimum wage jobs. Okay, you're under $35,000. The W-2s that we send the government, right, they know how much you make. You find them, knock on their door and say, hey, I will pay for you to you want to be an electrician? You want to be a nurse? I will pay for you to go and get a technical skill that yields you more than a minimum wage job. I will pay for your child care. I will take care of you because here's how I look at it. It is a short-term investment to create someone that now is in a prosperous position. They become a homeowner. They start paying more in taxes. They start creating a culture within their own family of success and prosperity. I'm investing in people. It is simple to say, let's just raise the minimum wage. Here's a couple more nickels an hour. Good luck. Because here's what happens, for those of you that believe in a higher minimum wage, here's what's going to happen. We raise the minimum wage to $15. Everything you buy is going to get more expensive. It's a fact. Everything will get more expensive. You know who didn't get a raise? The dental hygienist who's a single mom living in New Britain driving to Harvard every day. She didn't get a raise. So now what ends up happening is the goods that she's buying become more expensive, but she doesn't have increase. She didn't get a raise to afford this. So now every week she has a little bit more, she has a little bit less in her bank account because milk's more, gas is more. We're not actually propping people up. It's the simplest solution a politician can give you. Just raise the minimum wage. And here's the dirty little secret about minimum wage. You guys ever notice the ones that push it the most are the unions? You ever wonder why? Minimum wage workers are not in unions. Do you ever wonder why they push it? I want to take a stab in the dark. Now, unions negotiate their contracts based off the floor of the salary level. So if the minimum wage goes up, now if I'm a skilled laborer, I get to have 35% of whatever the floor is. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? So if minimum wage is $15 an hour, now as a union member, I just got a raise. So now when we go to build a school, it's more expensive. Whatever unionized Stop and Shop has unions, more expensive. Because they're negotiating their contracts on where minimum wage is. They don't tell you that stuff. I want people to be more successful and more prosperous. And so those types of conversations, I'm more than happy to have. I got yelled at once because I believe in inner cities where you have only 20% of students going to college, we are failing 80% of those kids. But yet we teach on a college track. So if I know and listen, this is what amazed me. When I had suggested that in inner cities, kids should be given a choice in 8th grade to choose if they want to go to VOTEC school, where they can learn to be something that literally at 18 they can go get a job at $45 an hour. A mechanic, whatever it is. They can have that choice in 8th grade. And you know what someone said to me? And this was what made me laugh. This was someone who lived in Madison, from wealth, liberal. You can't expect them to make those decisions then.
What?
Excuse me? But white kids do it every year. Am I going to go to Loomis Chafee? Am I going to go to Kingswood, Oxford? It's okay for those families to make those decisions in the quality of their education, but somehow, when we give a choice to people who are lower on the economic scale, they don't know how to make that decision. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I think poor communities are much more educated and they're much smarter than many of the wealthier liberals believe. Because I've been there, I've lived it, right? How do you think, it's the funniest thing, when you live paycheck to paycheck, you gotta be very smart. You're not dumb. And these are one of the things that I get really frustrated with. And Republicans do it too, I mean, don't get me wrong. But policy-wise, the policies Democrats push don't actually lead to success. I don't see it.
I have a question about school choice. We know that education is connected to property values, right?
Yes.
Okay, I could go to New Britain and buy myself a mansion for $300,000. I come to Farmington, then I'm living in a trailer for that much money. So, with school choice, how does this all play out? How does the taxes work? If I live in Farmington, all of a sudden my house is going to be devalued. How are you going to compensate me for that?
So with the ECS formula, where you have communities, and you can use other states as a model, where you have the ECS formula, you have people who are in impoverished communities, the money follows the student. So for example, if you are in Britain and you want to go to Farmington, the state of Connecticut says, okay, Farmington, here's $30,000 for this student, thank you. So it's not actually going to cost the residents that live in that the community.
No, I know, but then why would I buy a house in Farmington for $800,000? Because I want my kids to go to school in Farmington, when I could buy one in New Britain for $200,000 and still get my kids to go to school in Farmington.
Because you wouldn't have to deal with the potential of going to the bodega and getting robbed in Farmington and people in the break.
I think education is a much stronger driver than
Sure, but no one is going to voluntarily move out of Farmington and move to New Britain. They're just not. Like, I understand your point, but it's just one of those things where look, in the state of Connecticut, for those that don't know, you guys familiar with Shepherd's O'Neill? You guys know what that is? Okay. It basically, in our state constitution, we're one of the few states that has required equal education. The state mandates it. And we tried this charter school thing, the only thing to make education equal in the state is choice, is allowing the parents to choose what's equal. I understand entirely what you're saying, but I guess from my perspective, is that I don't see massive flux of people moving to New Britain. Because they also, when you look
But
at
I'm saying your property value, I think, will decrease, especially for...
It's already decreasing. I mean, right now, the system we have, for those that don't know, since 2009, the property values in the state of Connecticut have, since the crash, haven't improved. In fact, they're going the other way. There's just another report that just came out this morning. It is not pretty. And part of that reason is because the state of Connecticut is doing lots of crazy stuff and demanding more taxes and all this other stuff. But it's not as though the system is currently working. So we have a situation of property taxes going up already, values are going down, and the quality of education is decreasing. So I personally think what would end up happening is that because I'm more of a libertarian in a free market, quality of education would have to improve if you want to keep students. So what would happen is these school districts that are failing but yet get the most from the state would have to change how they operate. I just, right now it's not working. That's just how I feel.
Are there other questions? Yes?
You have a podcast.
I do.
The most recent one was on a couple of days ago, actually, on March 15th. On the podcast, you were talking about how there are recent examples of double standards in the media
Yes.
between Democrats and Republicans. Can you give me some specific examples?
Well, I'll give you a prime example on my organization.
Okay.
I have an executive board, we meet monthly. There's a particular reporter that, in terms of his coverage of me versus my Democrat counterpart, 94% of his stories about party activity are about me. And usually negative. What contract I signed, what vendor I hire, what conversation I may or may have had. 94% of his articles, and the reason he's doing that is in order to show weakness within my organization, because if my organization is not run well, how likely is it a donor to give money? How likely is it for someone to come out and listen or talk? And that's just one example that I personally deal with. How about this one? You have a situation where, with the tolls issue, right? That is something that I think like 60% of the state doesn't want tolls, right? You have several towns that are passing resolutions denouncing tolls, right? I called a reporter just yesterday, and I'm like, because there was Joe Arasimowicz, for those that don't know, he's the leader of the House for the Democrats. He basically was demeaning and called, I think he used morons or something, like these people that are trying to fight the state government, like all this, like, basically it's nonsense, they shouldn't do it, okay? So, does he feel the same way about William Tong, who is spending Connecticut taxpayer dollars to sue the federal government? Now, I'm not arguing whether he should or shouldn't, but at the end of the day, you talk about hypocrisy. You have local towns saying that tolls are going to impact us. People are going to jump off the highways and drive through our local downtowns because they're avoiding tolls. And they're saying we don't want tolls. But yet we have an attorney general who took a flight that we paid for down to the border. So tell me the difference, and this is what I said to the reporter, you need to ask these questions. They're like, the reporter starts arguing with me that it's not a valid point. Now look, I'm not saying what William Tong's doing right or what the local towns are doing are right, but simply it's the same thing. You have a local government saying we don't like this, we want to stop it. There's no difference to me than what the state of Connecticut's doing to the federal government. But they won't write that story. They won't even ask the question.
I would like to respectfully disagree. I don't believe that there is some type of agenda against the Republican Party, just like how I don't believe that there's some type of agenda towards the Democrat Party. We have different forms of media nowadays, and you can either have one side, which would be Fox News, versus the other side of CNN. For example, in each side, they always pick.
Fox News doesn't cover us.
No, but my point is.
No, but I understand what you're saying, but I'm talking about what's happening in the state of Connecticut. I'm dealing with the Hartford Courant, Fox 61, WTNH, WFSB, Connecticut Post. Just do me a favor, go to our Twitter feed, the CTJ
No, I
Twitter
understand where you're coming from, but my specific question was about the podcast when you were talking about nationwide rather than individually. And nationwide, I don't believe that there's some type of agenda between both, because when I was doing my speech in New Britain High School for the gun control thing, Fox News, the 61, they would ask me, oh, well, how does 9/11 play with gun control? And that's not a question that would fit with gun control specifically. Versus CNN, we're throwing me softballs like, oh, how do you feel today? Like, are you happy? I feel like every single news media has their own perspective and their own agenda they want to push. So it's not really, it's not really like we're gonna take down the Republican Party. It's just more of each media has their own idea and they're gonna push it no matter what. So I don't think that Republicans are victims, nor do I think that Democrats are victims either.
Right. So again, I'm gonna respectfully disagree. Having done this job and how the media reported and covered Bob Stefanowski. Every time Bob Stefanowski spoke, they demanded details about how he was going to fix Connecticut. They didn't ask Ned Lamont those same questions. And you're talking about national. I'm not. I'm talking about local reporters. I'm talking about where most of you consume local news and how we are treated differently. Go look at the Hartford Courant and how they've called for me to resign 4 times. 4 times. And I understand your point of, yes, you're right, Fox News, MSNBC, I completely agree with you. I'm simply saying is that it's actually more nuanced than that. When you go to our Twitter feed, we will criticize a Democrat policy. The Democrats don't even have to respond to us. Every reporter will tweet at us, basically like arguing against what we're saying. Instead of reporting it, they're making comments. And that's kind of what I mean. And that centered with that podcast. It was literally, there was an entire thread of reporters trashing us. But meanwhile, go back and look how many stories, and here's a prime example. How many people paid attention in the 2018 gubernatorial election? Ned Lamont, and there's videos of him saying, we're not going to toll cars, we're not going to toll cars, we're not going to toll cars. And guess what? He changed his mind. We're going to toll cars. If a Republican had done that, you know what the headline would have said? It's something that is small and nuanced, but we notice it every day because when there's headlines been about me, I might as well have murdered someone in the middle of town square, the way that they write these things. How about this one? 2015. Republicans, and for those that don't know, 2015 is a municipal cycle, which means mayors are first elected. Republicans gained in entirety, out of the 169 towns, we increased our lead over the Democrats by 4 towns. We were already ahead, but we increased our lead over 4 towns. The headline in the Connecticut Post was, Connecticut Republicans failed to gain momentum. So I called the reporter. What's this about? Well, you didn't win Fairfield. Hold on. So I win everywhere else. But somehow the headline is I failed to gain momentum. And the reason they do that is because in Fairfield in particular, that's where my donors are. So the impression is we're not winning. Does that make sense?
No, yes.
So I agree with you nationally.
Yeah,
But it's much more different when
Yeah.
you're dealing with local media.
Other comment?
Come on, guys. Policy questions, immigration, marijuana.
How do you feel about right now with the budgeting for gun control in the country and how?
You mean budgeting?
Well, okay, so I think it was the senator who went to New Brand High School and started talking with some kids about whether or not they wanted teachers to be armed with tasers, either with guns or with some type of baton weapon thing, or and where they're gonna get the money from. So my question is, should teachers be armed with any kind of weapon, and where do we get that money from if it's not from taxpayers?
Okay, a couple things. One is if a teacher wants to arm themselves, I think they should be allowed to. I'm not saying they should be forced to. And frankly, I look at it like, shouldn't we do everything possible to protect children's lives? I mean, again, we'll find the money. Like if it means protecting a child, we'll figure it out. I'm sure that, and I'll use a prime example, like when we talk about like prioritization of money, the Democrats in Connecticut are whining about the Democrats wanting to bond, or the Republicans wanting to bond money to fix bridges. But last year, the Democrats had no problem bonding money to build a splash pad in paving, right? So you find a way to pay for it. I think at the end of the day, if we're talking about protecting children's lives, as far as I'm concerned, everything's on the table.
Are there data to show that arming teachers protects children?
No, there's data to show that arming a good guy with a gun is better than no guy with a gun. Data shows that.
What happens when we open up, like, just people are people no matter where you work, what you do. So in a public school system, when you have the public essentially teaching your children and your children around, how do we come up with policies if we were to implement teachers having the choice to carry guns when you have maybe convicted felons,
Or teachers?
rapists? You have teachers that have drugs and guns and do things like that, whether people want to think it happens or not.
But you're talking about certain things. That's anecdotal. So if there's someone who's a
But
convicted
anecdotal
felon
is
who's a
how
high
you
school
develop
teacher,
policies. You have to think from every angle and explore every facet.
right? But if a convicted felon, if he illegally or she illegally has a firearm, or like
You can't
normally,
illegally, you can't have a firearm as a felon, I understand that, that's not my point. But the fact that you have those people around, someone who can legally have a gun, what do we do? How do we implement policy to protect kids when you're opening that up? It's just opening something up. I'm not against it necessarily.
So let me ask you guys a question. If two people walk in here right now with knives, you're suggesting hand-to-hand combat?
Well, as somebody who
'Cause
is a
I have
gun
a gun.
owner, I have a gun too, but I'm not, and I am
Not
for
me.
not per se arming people. However, you can also have your weapon used against you if you're
Sure.
not trained properly.
Sure.
So that's a big thing too. I just feel like there's a lot of things we need to explore about that. Training, courses, implementing money, policy. Again, like I know you said you're all open for it, I'm just opening it up for discussion, like things that need to be thought about. It's not just as simple as arming a teacher, training them a basic course, which our courses are embarrassing. The book is embarrassing. They need to have significantly more.
Talking about the NRA training?
Yes, it's basic. It needs to be a lot more expansive. Also Canadian citizens, so we still have guns, but we have significantly more laws. And while we have had several, but minute in comparison, there is some level to show that it works and does help control situations.
Right, so
Furthermore, on the gun issue, I know we're talking about Connecticut, but we can speak about Connecticut. Why is it that we can't formulate a plan and a policy when New Zealand is able to do so within 72 hours?
New Zealand doesn't have a Second Amendment.
I know that, but what can we do? Like, what can we do? You know what I mean? How can we achieve the goals of protecting kids while meeting these?
So I think that the issue when it comes to protecting children, and this is when you have like anti-gun activists talking about the data, they often don't talk about the data centered around, like in England, for example, they're now trying to ban knives and hammers, right? Because violent crime is violent crime.
It is, with a truck, a bomb, a spoon,
So-
or whatever, I get that.
What is the most valuable thing that we own?
Ourselves.
Well, ourselves. So, from my perspective, our Constitution allows us to protect the most valuable thing we own with a firearm, with the right to bear arms. Because, as to my point, if someone were walking here with a knife,
I know, I
and
get that,
start
but what does it have
slashing.
to do with these kids in a school and harming a teacher? I do get the premise of the Second Amendment and protecting and wanting to protect. Who doesn't? That's common sense, and I think that's where Democrats and Republicans need to have a discussion, because we both have the same end goal, which is
I
to
don't think we
protect
do.
kids. Well, mine and yours are the same, and we are staunch opposites. So
No, but I
there's-
don't think, I think the end game of the anti-firearm movement is to get rid of firearms in the country. But I think, because you're listening to some of the Democrats talk about how the Constitution needs to change.
But I'm right here sitting in front of you saying, I don't want that. So if you and I were the only people to discuss this, how can we come up with
So
a
what would
plan
you
to arm
suggest?
teachers safely?
We're in favor of background checks.
Background checks, what else? Like, I don't know, there's all sorts of things. I mean, I guess we're both brainstorming here. Anybody else? What else do people think?
So I'd like to make a couple points and then try to answer your question my own way. One, there isn't a piece of legislation written that is going to stop somebody from harming somebody else if they want to do so.
Great.
Two, the greatest loss of life due to an attack, a mass murder, was Nice, France, I believe, where somebody ran 82 people over with a truck. And using a vehicle as a weapon has happened multiple times. It happened in the United States, I think in New York 2 years ago, where somebody ran 12 people over with a truck. If somebody wants to do bodily harm to somebody, there's not a law that's going to stop that, right? But, so I don't really think that, we're looking at the problem from, oh, guns are the problem. Guns really aren't the problem. The people who use them are the problem. And if you take guns away, they're going to find some other way to do that. I don't think statistically, the countries that have reduced their guns, like Great Britain, Australia, their shootings have gone down, but their crimes haven't gone down. Their violent crimes haven't dropped significantly because you've taken away guns. People just find some other way to do that. I would also like to point out that in this country, we talk about guns in school. In this country, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, we had gun clubs. If you went to high school, your school was full of guns. Your students shot guns. They were trained to use those guns. It was part of gym class, So you didn't see kids walking around shooting people back then. So it doesn't seem to me like the problem is guns. I think the problem is societal, and we have to look at why are our children who are in school, right, turning to a gun to solve a problem? That's the real question, right? And we were here before, we talked about the term going postal, which some of you are too young to understand or know where it came from. But it came from a rash of shootings in the late 80s and early 90s where postal workers went in and killed their bosses and killed some co-workers. And when they did an investigation into why that was happening, right, they wanted to know, why is this happening? They weren't just like, oh, well, we're just going to ban guns. Why is this happening? They found out that, the people who did that had filed multiple complaints about the workplace. The workplace was a toxic environment. Nothing had been done. And these people basically reached the point where it was the last straw, and that's the way that they saw a way out of whatever the environment that they were in. So we really need to look at, I think, what is causing it in our school systems, right? We have school systems with zero tolerance policies. When I was a kid, if you got into a fight, you went out to the playground after school, you punched somebody in the nose, or you got punched in the nose, you shook hands afterwards. Kids had the ability to solve their own problems, to work that out, to build skills for conflict resolution. You don't have that, right? You just don't have that today. Kids don't get to work out their own problems amongst themselves. You have these zero tolerance policies. People step in. They don't let kids resolve anything. Kids don't get to make any of those choices, right? One of the other things that I've noticed is most of these mass shootings in schools, they're white kids. I think white kids don't have as much conflict as kids of color, right? Right. So if you look at neighborhoods where you have high populations, right, and neighborhoods that aren't as affluent, those people deal with conflict on a daily basis. Now, you have shootings in those neighborhoods where they're one-on-one shootings, right? You may have gang violence where, okay, I'm going to kill that person because they killed somebody or they're in my territory or whatever. You don't have mass shootings. You don't have somebody saying, hey, I'm just going to kill as many people as I can, right? And I think that that's something that's worth thinking about, right? So that's a one-on-one thing that does happen, but you don't have that same thing. And that's because I believe that there's conflict there, that people have to work out from an early age. And
the only other thing that I want to add to that is there's also a movement when I was kind of in high school where it was this idea of, and I'm not saying that I was against the idea, but it's this new educational approach about incorporating every child into a school system. So they shut down facilities. Like I remember being a kid and my uncle Carmi would be like, I'm gonna send you to Fairfield Hills. It was a facility for kids that had problems. Those no longer exist. And so we've mainstreamed kids that have mental issues and are heavily medicated. And then what ends up happening is the school system, who are not equipped, frankly, to be dealing with a lot of this, end up shuffling these kids along, and they're in environments that is not necessarily where they would have been 30 years ago. And that's also part of this problem. I was a conspiracy theory, that the pharmaceuticals were like, hey, let's mainstream the kids and then drug them. But these kids that may have issues. Adam Lanza, right? The Parkland shooter and Adam Lanza both had similar issues mentally. And I think that's also part of this conversation, is that there's mental illness with some of these kids that no one really wants to talk about, but that's also part of this equation. Anyone that wants that much mass destruction, something's off. I think everyone would agree with that.
Just about the mental illness thing, because I agree, and then but I'm always on two sides. So the other side of me always says, is it fair to scapegoat the mentally ill like that all the time? Like, I'm kind of sick of that narrative.
I'm not scapegoating.
No, I know, I'm not saying you are, but just people blaming the mentally ill. Statistics do prove that the wide range of mentally ill are in fact like nonviolent, just like a lot of our criminals. So I know that, but to say
Just
that.
like the vast majority of gun owners won't shoot up a school.
I know, I agree. But going forward with that, is it worth, as a state, implementing something to look at the physiology of the individual rather than blaming the mental illness, and maybe looking at mandating, instead of just taking them, putting them in prison, maybe mandating for scans to see if these people have like a physiological difference to explain why they're maybe acting in such a strange,
Well, but I'm not
way.
saying a prison. I'm saying there was facilities where students could go and they were basically there most of their adult life. I mean, it was tragic. My Uncle Joe, was named after, his daughter was Down syndrome, and the state closed the facility she was in. So she moved back in with my aunt and uncle, who were 75 years old at that point. So it's not mentally ill per se. It's simply there were facilities for people to go that were supervised 24 hours, and it was I think it was a better system for, look, every school system, and this is where it's actually kind of, there's putting a lot of money and emphasis on special education school systems, there's a lot of downward pressure where kids in the middle are getting forgotten, right? So you have the top end students in the higher levels, the AP, all this other stuff, right? They're going to be fine, right? They're going to get in the colleges they want, they're going to be fine, that top 10, 15, 20%. Then you have this big swath of kids who are special ed, who are getting a ton of money and attention. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's what's happening, right? And then you have all these kids in the middle that are kind of ignored, right? And then they're told they need to go to college, and then they take on $100,000, $300,000 debt. I think we just have to philosophically just look at what we're doing and say maybe we should approach it differently. As far as the gun thing, I'm just a firm believer that I have the right, you have the right, everyone has the right to defend the most valuable asset that we have. And many people don't even understand, and particularly because there's a lot of politicians that put out misinformation, the difference between semi-automatic, what is already illegal, what isn't legal. Most people that are anti-gun, most, not all, don't even know anything about guns. Like, for example, they're like, we need to ban semi-automatic. Well, semi-automatic literally means you pull the trigger and it reloads itself. It's not like you hold the gun like Hollywood where you hold the trigger down and just keep shooting. That's not how it works. Most handguns are semi-automatic. In fact, statistics have proven it's actually semi-automatic is best for women, because a firearm is the only thing that will allow a woman to be on the same footing to defend herself to a man that's physically stronger. A firearm is the only thing, if someone is going to murder, rape, rob you, a firearm, particularly for women, is the only thing that puts you on even footing to defend yourself against me. It's a fact. You have a question?
No, it was more of a comment. I was gonna say there was a lot of First, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that everyone wants to ban guns, because it's not a real.
Everyone what?
That everyone wants. Okay, like a good portion of people want to ban guns, because it's not gonna happen. There are too many guns. We don't know how to get them back. We try to get them back, we still have no way to make sure that nobody's gonna keep their own. It's not, like, that should not be at this point in time, that should not even be a conversation, because it's not gonna happen. We're not gonna take away the Second Amendment. We're not even talking about trying to change the Second Amendment. We're mostly talking about how are we supposed to protect the kids. And everyone's basically on the same side, I hope, that we all just want to protect our kids. But I do believe that giving guns to teachers may be one of the most extreme ways with a more deadly ratio than there is a survival rate ratio to it. For example, we can't.
But just kind of, that's completely hypothetical, because you don't
I
have
mean,
the data
yes,
to back.
we
That's
don't
your
have the
theory.
data. That it is my theory. That's why I said it's like it's a comment. If we can't, this is more of my theory, my opinion. If we can't even regulate how our police officers decide to use their guns, how are we supposed to make sure that teachers?
How are you going to regulate a police officer using gun? What do you suggest?
I mean, we all understand that police brutality is a thing, correct? We all understand how much paranoia can play into how deadly a weapon can
10 to
become.
15%. They're just like every industry. There's 10 to 15% of people that are bad at their job.
Yes, I know, but when you start surrounding kids with guns, something's going to happen. Whether or not the teacher is responsible, whether or not the students are being safe, it's going to happen because that's how kids are. This isn't a question on whether or not the teachers are going to be okay with it. It's whether or not the kids are going to feel safe.
Do you, hold on. Do you think the teacher's just going to put the firearm on the front desk and be like, hey guys, don't touch that?
No, but my point is that there have been so many accidents with guns in general. We cannot for sure say every teacher is going to be safe, and we cannot for sure say every teacher is going to be okay. So that kind of ratio doesn't make any sense.
So should we ban driving?
No, okay, but that's not a fair comparison.
Sure, accidents are accidents.
But that's not a fair comparison because.
Well, I actually think it's the other way. When you're talking about we're creating policy to protect someone's life from, say, a mass shooter versus the convenience of driving to stop each other. I think the conversation about protecting someone's life is much more important than conveniently driving somewhere. So the point is there's accidents with cars, there's accidents with planes, there's tragedies everywhere.
Of course, but a car was not designed to be a weapon. A gun was.
That has nothing to do with it.
But it does have everything to do with it because we cannot ban cars just like how we can't ban guns. But we cannot put guns into the hands of people who may or may not.
We can ban cars. We can. It's not a right to have a car. We can ban air travel as a Democrat.
But it's not. I'm saying that it's not within reality.
Yes,
it's not within reality.
But the point is I guess the reason I'm saying this is when you're talking about protecting life. What you're saying is, well, the risk does not weigh the reward. I disagree with you. I think, and again, I'm going to point to the idea of air travel or cars or these other things. I agree with you. The economy would crash. But the problem is that we do things out of convenience, and there's still accidents. More people die from cars than do firearms. More people die from opioids than cars.
Yes,
why are we banning opioids?
No, you cannot. It's not okay to make those comparisons because it's not even within the realms of reality.
Sure
A gun is a weapon, correct? A car is not a weapon. We use it for other motives.
I would argue that
opioids were not used as weapons. They were used to help people with hospice care. When we created these items, right? We did not create it with the intention to kill. Therefore, we did not compare them together.
How many people die a month from the opioid crisis?
I understand that, but that's a whole
I'm just asking, how many people?
Too many people, but that's a whole other discussion.
There's more
It's not
people die a
created.
month. Well, there's more people that die a month from the opioid crisis than do in an entire year from firearms. In 1 month. So when we're talking about banning things, or we're talking about the sanctity of life, what we should be talking about is banning opioids. I would 100% ban opioids. Ban them. Why? I would legalize marijuana and use it to pay away the things. I mean, there's so many better things that we can be doing. And this is what makes me laugh. What did we do before opioids? Before they were mass produced and forced on us for every surgery, everything we did, what did we do? So I think the point is that if we're talking about the sanctity of life, when you're making a gun argument versus we have a literal, devastating cultural generational crisis happening with opioids.
Yes.
But we're not talking about banning those.
I understand that because opioids have a different list. Okay. My point is, we should not be comparing 3 different things together. When we talk about gun control, we talk about gun control and guns only. We cannot bring in cars or opioids.
Why?
Because that's a whole other discussion with a whole other history, with a whole other solution. When it comes to opioids, we have different solutions for that. We need to legalize marijuana. We're on the same team right now. Thing is, I believe that guns are way too much of an extreme to go to before we
To
even
protect my
start.
own life?
No, okay, no. When we talk about the ratio between whether or not successful or unsuccessful.
Right, but
I
let's
believe
look
first,
at
before we
if
go
this
into
gentleman-
the gun control debate, I feel like we have to go with the mental health control debate, or with that mental health debate,
Sure.
right? So instead of putting all this funding towards let's give armed teachers with guns and batons and whatever, right? Why don't we talk about more therapists and more guidance counselors being available for all of these students who do have these mental problems? Because it's such an extreme to go there. Because I can play that extreme too with the whole car thing that you did. Why don't we just have tanks?
So what?
Why don't we have tanks at school and just
Actually-
run over whoever comes in with a gun?
Why
It's
don't-
such an extreme.
Why don't we do? First of all, a tank and a gun is not the same thing.
That's
I
the
know,
point.
that's my point.
Right? No. But when you're talking about the sanctity of life, and this is what it is. But look, here's the thing: what you're basically creating is a safety net with the therapist with holes in it. Let's do all of the above.
Why don't we do one before the other to make sure
Why?
that we find
find
a
the
solution.
problem.
So we
Right.
find a
So
solution
here's the thing. So
before
let's
going to the extreme part.
So you want to spend all this money, we hire all these therapists, do all these other things, and then there's a mass shooting. Now what?
Wait, time out. You can't use one example for one thing as the blanket of the issue. There's always gonna be there's been a shooting every week in this country, right? Accidental or mass shooting or otherwise, a gun has been discharged every week in this
Right.
country. It's been in the news. Okay, so if there is a shooting, that doesn't mean that the counselor failed. That means that that person wasn't able to be reached to pull them back to reality to not commit
I didn't
that
say the
crime.
counselor failed.
I'm saying if there is a mass shooting and we implement counselors in all the schools and we don't arm the teachers and we don't change gun control laws, and you said, well, what if there's a mass shooting? That just means that person wasn't able to be reached to stop them from doing what they were gonna plan on doing anyway.
So, and here's exactly the point. When we're talking about the protection of children's lives, what I can tell you is that you have plenty of teachers who are ex-military, ex-cop, or people who have firearms.
Right.
You give them the opportunity as a fail-safe from all those things that you're talking about, make sure everyone in this room is protected. I get what you're saying, and I'm not opposed to more therapists and trying to help kids, and I'm not.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't stop a kid from walking in here with a knife
No,
or
I
a gun.
agree.
The only thing that works is someone else being armed to defend those kids.
Well, it didn't work in Parkland.
Because that guy ran.
That guy ran away and
So how do we
he
make sure
didn't
that
have
that
a
person
gun.
doesn't run
He
again?
also
Okay.
didn't
So
have
how
a
good is
gun.
the guy with the gun?
Can I just interject here, please? I love the conversation. It's,
Oh, we gotta go?
no, but I
You're like,
did
awesome.
see,
We're not
other
hiding
hands up, and I want to give others the opportunity, like Kelly had her hand up in the front, and
I was just trying to diffuse the situation.
Well, I don't know if there's anything to diffuse. It's been very civil compared to
politics,
some
yeah,
debates.
it's
And, you know, when it comes to these highly charged issues, that's what's going to happen, but it's okay, right? Are there other folks who want to pivot to another topic, maybe? Because we had
We're
our
not gonna
gun
solve this
control
today.
debate in September. So, Donna.
Well, I don't need Mike, I'm good. The point I was gonna make is that I don't think the gun control issue and arming people and their right to do that, and talking about therapists and getting mental health, improving our treatment of mental health, I don't think those are mutually exclusive, okay? We are not really good with identifying people with mental illness who are risks to commit these crimes. We are not good at it. So whatever you want to say, I can hire 1,000 counselors, I can put them all in the schools, I can talk to every child in every school, but we as a society don't have a good indicator of who's more likely or not, honestly, to commit these crimes. You're troubled, this kid's troubled, well, which one of these children is going to shoot up a school? I don't know. But if I'm in the classroom and you come into my room and I don't know your history, I don't know if you're troubled, I don't know what meds you're on, I don't know anything about you, you come at me with a knife, and I'm gonna shoot you. I'm sorry, and I consider that my right, okay? Now, if you're gonna put me in a classroom, you want me to teach in a difficult environment, where my life is at risk, and now you tell me, you have to teach in this harsh environment, but none of us can arm ourselves, that's not fair. And you're asking people to teach in environments where their lives are at risk, or they may feel they need to defend a room full of people. I'm not gonna do it with a baseball bat. I'm gonna do it with a gun.
It's interesting. We had this very debate among faculty at Tunxis. I know, Jessica, you can vouch for that. A majority of faculty don't agree with that. You make perfect sense. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but it's interesting.
It makes sense
how we have
until the guy with the knife's in the room.
Exactly.
Very true.
Then why don't we just have security guards and police officers who've been trained for years to do this rather than just give a teacher and have a couple
Well,
of months?
That's a new policy.
That was
Okay,
great.
so
I
then let's
can
not-
answer that for Tunxis. For Tunxis, it's a question of resources. I mean, it costs a lot more money to have armed security guards. And there were also some faculty who were opposed. All right,
Just on that point, there was a father who was a retired military guy who offered to sit every day in front of his daughter's school because he's ex-Navy SEAL. And the school district told him no. He was doing it for free. It's crazy.
That can open up a can of worms, though, sometimes, unfortunately. It really has. I have my own experience with that.
I was just going to tell one story I either heard on NPR or talk radio show about, and it relates to the immediacy of being able to need a gun to defuse a situation. Not needing to shoot a kid, not needing to brandish a weapon, but the need to, as a show of force, and I can speak to this because I did 6 years as military police, to use a gun as a show of force to stop someone and realize how grave the situation is. So these boys went to this bathroom at a private grade school. There was like 4 or 5 of them, and they took this girl into this bathroom and they trapped her in the girl's bathroom, and they were going to rape her, but the teacher, she came in with a gun and stopped that rape from happening, because how was she going to fight 5 boys? You think they're just kids, but they're not. They're smart.
I was
They're
200
very
pounds in high
aware.
school.
Right.
They're not.
Play football.
Yeah, they're not little harmless, like, oh, I'm so innocent, I don't know anything. And you're not really going to beat up 5 kids. It's more physically difficult than that. So that gun diffused the situation. So I agree with every single person here on your perspective, because I respect your perspective. But for everyone's perspective, there is an opposing situation that disproves your theory and your thoughts, because we can't actually control other people.
I have a great idea.
What's
Ready? You put a sign out that says all of our teachers are armed. It's a fake gun, but you put it there, so at least the appearance, like when someone puts a sign out that says,
Right.
we have an alarm system.
But they really don't.
Right, so, I mean, we're talking about the same generation that eats Tide Pods, so I think that would probably work.
But they have statistics from the criminals that say they know decoys and stuff like that.
Louis, you want the last word? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's
I just
right.
wanted to make sure everyone was safe.
Sure. Well, I just, actually, when this whole thing was going on, I just actually wanted to make sure I understood what her point was. And I think what she was trying to say is that she's afraid that a teacher carrying a gun is actually going to cause more violence. I think that's what the fear is. Not that that's what's going to happen, just that that's what her concern is and her fear is. But the other thing that, you were trying to make a comparison to driving a car and taking a flight and stuff. I think a more reasonable argument to that is, if the objective here is to save lives, and this is an argument that I've brought up to gun control advocates many times, if your objective is to actually save the most lives possible, 275,000 people a year in the United States die because in hospitals because they're given the wrong care or the wrong medication. If you really care about lives, why aren't you also screaming about, not that you don't get to talk about gun control, but why isn't that also a huge issue? Because 275,000 people dying a year is significantly greater in multiples than the amount of people that die by gun violence. And that's something that's not covered in the media. You don't see it talked about. You don't see anybody, saying, "Oh, look at how many people are dying." It's 275,000. I think gun deaths is around 50,000 a year.
It's actually closer to 35,000, the vast majority of suicide.
Yeah, no, I know most of them are suicide, but, you know, so that's a much greater amount of people, and if the objective is to save lives, then that's an argument that maybe you should also be having, or a discussion that we should also be
I have
having.
a question here. He's gonna give you guys glasses.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. I was just gonna make a comment based off of what Lou said. Another thing is,
You get the last word.
in 2016, there were
In 2016, there were 44,965 recorded suicides. So again, there's so many places we can be putting resources, and it seems like mental health awareness and solutions for children and adults who are committing suicide or killing other people as a solution to their problems is the focus. I think we all can agree on that. That's my last word.
Okay, well, I want to thank,
Oh, I just want to end with this, guys. No matter what you feel in your politics, don't be afraid to get involved. Don't let anyone tell you, particularly the women, it's not your time, it's not your turn. It happens a lot. Do not yield. I did. Do not yield.
I think we can all agree on that, right?
Yeah.
Getting involved is certainly the right thing to do, so I would like to thank JR for